Welcome to the Outrun Show, you guys. I'm Travis.
I'm Jesse.
I'm Justin.
And today we're going to be talking about controversial topics. We're talking about roles. We're talking about how we divide our programs up, which is a little unorthodox. Your style is unorthodox, yet effective. And some news about the new build. All that and more on today's Outrun Show. Okay, so let's kick it off with some news. Where are we at with the new gym? If you guys have not listened to the prior podcast talking about the history of our leases, which sounds really boring, but actually it was pretty entertaining.
It's kind of fun.
It was actually our most viewed episode.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
We had fun both talking about it and living it.
Yes,
Yeah.
talking about it and living it. No, I mean not to like, talk about our reach, which I didn't know was beyond like 2 viewers. I thought it was maybe, it's several people now, at least 2.
At least 3.
Several people.
No, I think that the total view count on that one was closer to like 500 on that one.
Cool.
So there was a good amount of people
Hey, thanks
who
for tuning in.
tuned in
Yeah.
for a second.
That was a special announcement.
That was a special announcement. So we're building a new gym. If you don't know, if you're not on that page, that is on the backs of us, our coaches, and our loyal members who give us the opportunity to work in a cool environment and spend Wednesdays instead of at a desk job talking to a vault box and a microphone.
Yep.
So that's awesome. We have right now broken ground. The official groundbreaking ceremony hasn't occurred, but the project itself, it's part of another build with other units in it, but it is broken ground. There's a giant hole in the ground, and now there is a unique concrete structure. We weren't giving away what that is. You would have to check social. I'll post some pictures on it or video of it later today.
When did you see that? When did you go over and check it out?
I was there just yesterday or the day before.
Yeah, I haven't seen it this week. So.
It's definitely ominous and large.
It's so huge. And guys, this hole is so big. I feel like when we first saw it, I immediately started like fighting back regret. I was like, it's too big. Guys. It's that entire unit almost.
Like, what did we do with that hole? No, well, the good things. Well, you can cover holes, so there's that.
I know you really. Travis has a fancy idea of suspending an entire floor and dropping it over this pit. So it's not happening though. By the way, it's not mechanically possible.
Wait.
It is mechanically possible, but it requires more engineering than we are qualified
we
to
have
do.
to believe, right? We have to believe.
I mean, I can't imagine the engineering of a pulley system to bring a floor that big to the ceiling that I would feel confident is not going to drop on me and annihilate me. It's not like ow, that hurt a lot. It's gone. Just gone. You're just gone. Just
Or hopefully you get into the pit and you get below the surface.
And so it just crushes you into a smaller version of me.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm kind of imagining like a Cirque du Soleil solution.
Yeah,
it's possible.
We constantly have to fight Travis on these type of
Travis
ideas.
has a lot of outlandish ideas around what he thinks can be physically possible with our skill set.
Yeah, I don't let the limits of physics constrain my imagination.
which is both like very heartwarming that he thinks we're capable of building something like that.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I have a lot of faith in you guys.
Yeah, just like a floating platform or a floating floor that lifts to the ceiling, we have to bring him closer to the earth.
Yeah, oftentimes it does sound like an old episode of Star Trek where I'm like, no, we need the floor that covers 20 square feet of a pit. And then Justin was like, no, Captain. And I'm like, Justy, I need you to do it now. No, I'm giving it all I got. I'll give my worst Scottish accent there. My ancestors would be rolling over in their kilts.
Yeah, I don't think. Maybe
wasn't that character's name Scotty too?
Yeah, it was Scotty.
And he has a Scottish accent.
Right. Was he really Scottish though?
I think the actor was, yeah.
Okay, but at least they got that right.
But that's actually 3. That's a stacking of 3 awful things.
Yeah.
Like they took a Scottish guy, which great move.
Yeah.
Then named him Scotty.
Ooh, little taboo.
Made sure that he was speaking his Scottish accent.
Really hard, right? Yeah.
Like any one of those on their own would have been just fine. But stack all three of them is a little culturally insensitive.
Well, and I'll just put a pin in this. Star Trek was actually very culturally progressive for the 60s. It's actually known for that because they had interracial relationships. You had people of different ethnic backgrounds playing key roles. I mean,
there was like species relationships,
right?
And there was like a whole episode where like the world was turned, where like they visited like a planet where like everybody was dating same sex, and so like to be hetero in a couple was actually like abnormal. Like I remember like watching these episodes and being like, whoa, like that's crazy. That's not that crazy, but it was at the time.
Right?
How did we get over here?
Star Trek. We were talking about crazy things.
Also,
yes, the captain.
But yeah, so the build is
really good.
The build is going on great. The dirt has been disturbed and structures have been planted in the dirt. So that's going forward.
Yeah, we're definitely planting it, Jim. As so look on social and follow us on Instagram, Run Parkour, and today we'll go over there. I'll post some pictures, and so then when the podcast gets out,
yeah, we gotta be over that way, anyways.
So that's news. The controversy. Let's start with some of the controversy around rolling. So we had a podcast a few episodes ago where we had to highlight the things that we thought was unique to parkour that everyone should learn and needed to know and be exposed to. We didn't really talk much about rolling, although quick follow-up, the gal that we did save from the river, you see that episode for that excitement. She sent Jesse a thank you card, so we actually had...
She actually sent us a bunch of cookies, but our coach just devoured them.
So it saved the woman.
Man,
tin of cookies.
And a tin of cookies. I didn't get one of those cookies.
You didn't get one of those cookies.
People say we don't give, right? They're like, no one's. People don't say that. I'm just saying, I'm just saying, I didn't even see the cookies for the woman we saved. All right, now I'm a little sour. All right, dang.
But yeah, no, she's all fine and well. No long-term effects. Her hearing aid works. By the way, the one that you saved
from that crawdad.
He's like shiny. But yeah, everything was fine. She actually came by the facility and dropped off the cookies, and I chatted with her.
Oh, she came over?
Yeah.
What? Oh man.
This was pretty early in the morning. I was just here dancing. So.
Oh man, that's crazy! Wow.
She was very grateful. So that's good news.
That's good news.
Rolling would not have helped her.
Yeah, I mean, if she was an expert, maybe. But I mean, she definitely rolled. Anyway, moving forward.
Okay.
So rolling, right? So where does it belong, guys? And kind of where do we teach it? And can you explain why it wasn't mentioned first? When I think that if you go to a lot of parkour programs in the U.S., at least, rolling is like one of the first things that you're going to learn. And programmatically, it is taught early for us as well. But why weren't you guys as compelled to talk about that? Because obviously we can acknowledge that the ability to roll and invert and know where you are in space is of tremendous value to parkour athletes.
Yes, the three things that we thought were most important for parkour were QM. What were the other two?
Yeah,
QM,
balance.
And I think I like jumping for mine, and no one said rolling.
No one said rolling. No.
So yeah, I don't think rolling is unique to parkour. First off, we kind of stole a roll from some other jiu-jitsu sport, right?
Martial arts, but we did improve on it, I would argue.
Yes, it is much better.
We adapted it to a different environment.
Yeah, and I feel like the first thing when you learn a roll, it's like, this is how you take a drop of something. This is how you survive a drop, or this is what you do when you have a big drop and you want to reduce the impact. But I don't really feel like it's that effective at doing that specific job. What I do think rolling is really effective at is teaching you how to invert for flips. I think it's the basic progression for front flip and side flip. So that's where our rolling is pushed. In our level 1 program, Orbit, those are the first milestones for learning front flip and side flip. But in parkour, you have to do something first before you get to the roll. And we've seen this. Sometimes you'll have a kid stand on a box and you say, all right, you need to drop to the ground and roll. And they just dive to the ground, right?
That happened multiple times.
So there is something in between the roll and the drop, and that's the squat. And the squat is hands down far more important than the roll.
Being able to absorb impact on a drop is a good prerequisite even before you get to rolling. And that's, and no disrespect to rolling, because that's parkour blasphemy.
Well, and it has saved all of us numerous times.
The roll or the squat?
Both.
Yeah, I can't, like, I definitely heard when we first learned parkour that rolls had saved someone. I forgot who it was, and they were like, "It can save your life." I don't think it's ever been like the prevention of an injury for me. A roll.
Oh, really?
I don't
like
think
when you
so.
bail out of flips, you don't.
It's legitimately saved me before.
Really?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Several times.
Yeah, I don't like a dive roll or like a foot
on
roll.
like a max effort Kong where my hand goes and I bash my knee.
Oh,
and
so you're
it's just
talking
like head dive.
Yes. Okay. So
Yeah,
the
it's
dive
assisted
roll.
dive roll.
Okay, so a dive roll.
Yeah, I'm just kind of lumping roll all into the same category.
That one I can see. The one where you land on your feet and then you transition into a roll.
Mm-hmm.
That one.
No, that one doesn't.
I
that
don't
one's never saved
like. I use it in flips. I use it out of a front flip or out of a back flip, right? So.
I've used it before to sort of save my knees potentially if it's like a really big jump, like jumping over a creek or a gap and dispersing the energy forward. But I feel like that's an awesome technique, but that's not something I could teach somebody in the first, and I wouldn't expect like the gal who we pulled out of the river 60 with a hearing aid. I wouldn't expect her to be doing like gap jump, dive roll. Right?
Or any sort of height drops that require
height drops that require it. The other one that comes up super common is, well, what if you just trip? And I think that tripping backwards and sort of the backwards break fall is something that I've probably ran into.
Yeah.
The slip out underneath you and go backwards and posting up and trying to avoid that scenario. Again, very hard to train. So my background in rolling came from martial arts first. And really, parkour put the twist on it where they're like, when we started training parkour, it was like, okay, now you're going to use your hands, which you don't do that typically in martial arts training because you're either throwing someone, you're being thrown and you're trying to keep a grip on them, or you're going to slap the ground with a break fall or something like that. And then also the ability to roll with a sword. Like when I did wushu, we would do dive rolls with a sword. Or we would do the rolls of the backwards rolls with two swords, and that's where you get that stupid that's not dumb technique. It's cool actually. The lazy bear.
Oh, the lazy bear.
The lazy bear where you
I
swing
thought it
the
was
arms
called something
around.
way cooler, like dragon
climbs pole.
Dragon climbs pole.
Yeah,
but it's lazy bear.
But it looks like a lazy bear when we do it.
If you watch a video, I mean, I haven't seen a dragon climb a pole before, but I have seen a panda bear roll on its back, and it looks pretty similar.
That might just be our representation of a dopey version of the dragon climbs pole. Is just panda rolls on bamboo.
well, normally they're doing the leg, and they come back to standing, right?
Right, and it's fast. So Andy Lay is like a great athlete.
It's like the B-boy, coin drop.
Yep. It's more like a coin drop, right? In its ascent, but usually it starts from the ground instead of going into the shoulder. But you can combine them, So that's a good example. These are all higher level skills, and I would say that so everything sort of falling nature we tend to teach as part of the discipline of ukemi, which Amos spent a ton of time putting work in early on, putting in the hard work, taking the falls, and then trying to teach ways to avoid it. Yeah, doing the physical research, right? Like parkour is like that. A lot of what we do, what people don't realize is a lot of what we're teaching is from our earlier mistakes, and we're like, oh, this is why we're going to teach this differently. For example, I would say one thing that's highly under-recognized as importance that I've seen practice as part of rolling is neck strength, right? So if you break fall or you fall backwards out of something, or you slip or peel out and fall on your back, and then have to brace yourself, the whiplash of that is where you see a lot of head strikes on things or neck injuries, or what you'll see even in front flips is that like neck cocked back when they land, and it's like, okay, with kids it's understandable because what do we say, like the head to body weight ratio is inverse. They're like 80% head weight.
They got a lot of head weight,
and then they're like little bobbleheads, right? But as you grow older, you have a smaller head, so you should be able to control it, right? And I don't see a lot of neck training done.
Yeah.
So now enter your neck trainer, right?
Yes.
Yeah, we should
segue my iron.
Yeah, it's most ridiculous recovery science. We're doing the research for you guys. You got the what?
An iron neck.
An iron neck.
It's like a UFO that straps around my forehead, and it's got a little bungee cord that I attach to a wall, and I'm have to turn.
It's like a disc around your like a halo.
Literally UFO. Yeah.
UFO around your head, and then you resist on like turns and things like that. And I first saw it on the Joe Rogan show, but
yes, I think that's where Olaf found it because he was the one who recommended it to me.
So. Also, most ridiculous purchase for recovery and training for me. Okay. I got one of the inflatable massage compression boots.
Oh, it's a massage too.
Yeah, like the Compex ones?
Yeah, they go. This one is, I can't remember the brand, and they're not sponsoring us, so I'm not going to say it anyway. But it goes up to the quad, and it inflates, and then it gets the lactic acid and blood flowing through. I recently had an ankle sprain, and I was like, I want to fix this faster, and I knew that I wasn't getting good circulation. These guys pointed out, we were doing a meeting, and they're like, your toes are purple. I'm like, look, I'm just that white. I'm just transparent a bit. You just know that what's going on in my circulatory system in any given moment. Take a look. So it pushes the blood and lymphatic fluids up and out, and then lactic acid, and gets that circulation, right? Mm-hmm. It's amazing. I actually fell asleep in it last night and woke up at like 12:30 in the morning.
And it was still going?
Yeah.
Oh my God.
And I was just like, I don't want to leave this ever, right?
That does sound really nice.
Oh, it's so great. Anyway, and then Jesse, he's a little more torturous. Your fitness tech tool?
Oh, I have an electrical stimulation.
Oh, yeah.
But because I'm both cheap in nature and I'm highly pragmatic, I skipped the like branded ones and went straight to a
Alibaba knockoff.
No, I went to a pharmaceutical company.
Oh, whoa!
I called them and I was like, "Yo, you guys got this like in UMass?" And they're like, "Yeah, of course. Here's our catalog." And I just bought it from a pharmaceutical company.
That's smart.
Yeah, because I was not gonna trust electrical stimulation from like some random company. Oh. Mostly because I wanted to be able to control both the wavelength and the pulse. So the pulse width. Excuse me. The pulse width of the electrical stimulation and the speed at which it contracts, and that you just like if you buy a knockoff, you don't usually get that really? Quality of being able to control those things. And so so I wanted the hertz to be really high because for fast twitch stuff you want to be over like they say over 90, but
90 what hertz?
90 hertz, yeah.
Okay.
And so I'm
frequency rate. Hertz frequency.
What's a taser at?
Good question. Probably pretty high. Colin can look that up.
Like I want to know how close we're getting to taser.
That's gotta be like.
But yeah, I bought that thing because I actually wanted to do 2-a-days during the first part of quarantine, because I was bored, and so I'd work out in the morning and I do like a heavy leg day, lifting some back squats, and then in the afternoon when I was just chilling watching Netflix and like taking emails and stuff, I'd slap those babies on there and get my second session in. But it was incredibly painful.
Right, so you're doing an electric session.
Yeah.
Whew. All right. So how much hertz is 90 hertz?
It's a lot, but it's
much
not as
less than a taser.
It's what's a taser at?
1,200 and 50,000. So it's in that range.
Wow.
Yeah,
that's a big range.
It's
police
tasers.
I'm not getting tased, which is good.
You did kick over your table though.
I did kick over my coffee table the first time, yeah. Because I have another E-stem that actually my grandparents gave me, and it's like just very like a pulse massager. It's really good. It's not an E-stem, and that one would like contract, and you get a good contraction, and it'd feel good. But that one I would always set to like 8 or 9, because I'm tough. Mm-hmm. And so this one I got, and it has the same little dials on 10, and so I was like, this one's stronger, so I'll go 6.
Of 10,
and
right?
Out of 10, yeah. Okay. 6 out of 10, and it's significantly stronger. And yeah, it just was like, and I set it to 10 seconds of like on time, so it'll take 3 seconds to ramp up to a full contraction, and then hold for 10 seconds, and then it's off for 15 seconds. That's kind of my 30-minute routine there. And I'll set it, and it was on the ramp, and I was like, oh, this is 6, no problem. And so I'm turning the dials to like 7 or 8, and then the ramp completes, the 3-second ramp, and it hits, and my leg just goes boom, and the coffee table goes, and I'm like, oh, and I'm calling, I'm like, Carly, oh. And she's standing there like, what? And I'm like ripping cords out. I'm like, oh God, yeah. So that was my first one. I was like, okay, cool. So this one's legit. This one works and does what I need it to do. And I had a massive bruise right here from where I kicked the coffee table.
Oh man.
And then that day I was like, okay, we're gonna switch to this one because now my like quads were just so sore after that, just hard contraction. So and now I know to be a little more careful. But it's been great
with pharmaceutical grade equipment.
Yeah.
Is that FDA approved?
Yeah.
That's great. Okay, I trust it a little more now. I used to watch videos like Bruce Lee practicing on those, and I was like, oh man,
it's awesome. Serious. And if you're out there like researching like, oh, I want an eStim, they are very expensive. Like you can buy branded name ones that are like $300. And they definitely have like more functionality in that they have like an app and they're a little easier to use, which, if $300, whatever, throw it out there. Mine cost $45 and actually has a wider range, both of pulse width and like settings than typically the like branded ones. So that's why I went with it. So if you are looking at that stuff, do your research, look up a couple of pharmaceutical companies. They usually have them because they use them in PT all the time. So.
I am just absolutely convinced that there is a focus on the fitness industry of bulletproofing your body and preventing injury. We talk a lot. This rolls as good insurance for this, by the way, or the ability to fall is good insurance for this because you can do irreparable damage if you fall poorly. But back to our earlier conversation, the point was I don't think beginners need to be tricked into that. I think that sometimes we have to be careful of what we assume that people can do. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
And it's like you walk into a martial arts class, and if your instructor says, okay, Justin, come on in. I'm going to teach you how to break the wrist and then do the jump and shoot the kick. And then you go out, and I'm a martial arts guy, so I can say goofy stuff like that, right? And then it's like, you're doing Rex Kwon Do, and then you're walking out thinking that what is going to happen on the street when you're like 120 pounds and you're not familiar with conflict or violence, and then you're going to encounter someone, they're going to grab your wrist, and then you're going to punch them. People get shot with knives and still attack people. Like this is real, right? So I don't know, unless you're going to Johnny Cage fatality them and pull the spinal cord out or something. You're not going to do this.
It's very rarely a finishing move.
Right. And then so it's like I kind of feel like sometimes we bill roles that way as like, I'm going to teach. I've been practicing roles as a beginner and I know how to roll. Like I've had people come in before and say this. I know how to roll, and I look at their rolls, I'm like, cool, but context matters so much. And basically there's so many parallels to martial arts and parkour. As you fall, you're in a fight. You're in a fight with Earth.
Yep.
And Earth doesn't play. It always wins. It's whether what you reconcile, spars. Right? Yeah. There's no sparring.
Mother Gaia only fights.
Right. And so I think that, the caveat to that is that obviously there's tremendous competence in the ability to be to proprioception, to be aware of space. We're talking about taking somebody who can't seem to manage to stick a jump 3 feet out to a target that's a 2x4 even. And now we're gonna make assumptions that they would understand where they are upside down without excessive amounts of volume and training.
Yeah. My goal when I'm training parkour and obstacles is to not get upside down usually. And when I fall or bounce off of something, I'm usually gonna try my best to not roll. Actually, I'll usually put my hands down and do like a 45 degree, like an angled cartwheel or some sort of macaco variation or QM gallop. But I will avoid rolling almost.
Me too.
As often as possible, especially if I'm outside. Like there's rocks on the ground, or there's glass, or there's just dirt, and I like my shirt, so I just.
There's like one, don't want to get dirty. Two, like even if you don't care about that, when you do roll, you are introducing risk. People don't talk about the other side of it, like rolling out. I've seen far more people in programs roll out of something into something else than I have seen them trip. I can think of maybe 2 or 3 scenarios where I've seen someone use a roll in my programs teaching that I was like, oh, we're like, that roll was necessary, absolutely, and it kind of like failed. I had one adult who's actually a former martial artist, and she came in and she was trying to do a step vault over a 4-foot box or something like that, and her toe caught, and she just dropped straight down into like almost like a handstand forward roll and rolled right out of it. And I was like, that was the one thing that really stands out in my mind. I was like, oh my gosh, that you use that as it was built. Like, but she'd only done rolls for a little bit where we worked enough to get the idea of putting her hands out, and then took her martial arts experience. She'd been thrown over so many hips at that height that I think she was very comfortable with doing that. And that's another thing, is that I actually think that hip tossing could probably benefit a lot of people who want to learn parkour rolls, like to be thrown from the hip, right? Because then you get used to where you, being upside down and what it feels like to come from that. You don't need it, but I'm just saying it's its own thing. It's like it's been around for a very long time. A lot of it is martial arts, and then it's adapted obstacles and parkour, and then the discipline of ukemi, or as we teach it, falling overall, is so broad and contextual when you start introducing things like rails. There's an entire library of tools that you could have to escape from falling on rails, and that's not rolling alone.
Yeah.
There are bounce backs, there's different threading, there's sit turns, there are things you would use to build those competences.
Yep.
And the first time that people in the program I teach for adults learn rolling is in conjunction with a bail out of the step ball, which is actually assisted dive roll. Mm-hmm. So they train with one foot stuck up, so they understand the context. Well, they start on the ground first, and they train that. But that's a worst case scenario.
Yep.
That you trip on a step ball. We're not going for that.
Mm-hmm. I think it's like in financial planning, you plan to have like an emergency fund, right? But saying that the emergency fund is financial planning isn't really true, right? It's like a thing you do and then you forget about it. It's not like, active investments where you constantly reevaluate and you're judging, right? Like rolls are they're like a thing. Okay, cool. Like I got it. I put it over here. But when we talk about fundamental skills, we talk about things that you constantly reevaluate, you constantly work on, right? And rolls are not really like a thing that, like, once you get them, the practice of parkour tends to reinforce that. You know what I mean?
Yeah, you should have to use them less and less, ideally.
Yeah. Well, yeah, or they just change. Like Justin was saying, and he goes out and trains, and the same thing for me. When I'm training and I fall, I very rarely actually roll unless I'm being super lazy and I fall on something and I'm just like, right, and I lazy bear it. Yeah. And in which case, then I roll I usually roll and then I just like, just because I'm like, right. But most of my actual falls are some sort of like I'm blocking off of a wall to change directions. I'm rolling my back across the wall. I'm grabbing something and pulling myself, or if I'm falling around a pole, I grab it and I, angle myself back up. It's so much more complex than what I could teach a person to roll, right? Because the situations are so contextual. And so that's why I think rolls, while important, aren't they're like a must learn, right?
Yeah, eventually you're going to hit it. You're going to learn a roll eventually, and you'll find a spot where you'll need it, but yeah, I don't think it should be your first go-to if you're starting to bail off something.
It's a very complex movement. A roll is complex. Mm-hmm. Like the number of times we've had to reevaluate how we teach shoulder rolls to new students is incredible. But the number of times we've had to reevaluate how to teach like broad jump or a precision, not as complex, right? But we like to think that the roll is so fundamental and basic that it's like, it's day one. When you walk in, we're going to teach you how to do a roll. But it's like, no, I'm going to teach you how to just move again.
Like, can you step?
Like maybe let's jump.
Can you jump on
Let's just jog. In fact, some people can't even do like a 2-foot jump to a 2-foot landing.
No.
Right?
Yeah. Most people can't.
Like you're like, all right, now jump off at 2 feet and land on 2 feet. And they jump and like one foot does the little skip. And I'm like, no, both feet at the same time. And they can't, right? And when that's the scenario with your client, you can't be like, all right, let's do this roll now. Even if you do feel it's important. But so that's why I don't consider it to be like a must learn skill. Plus a good structured parkour program is going to introduce falling pretty organically, and that they're going to increase the complexity and the intensity of the movement as you go, to the point where, just like all training, you are like, oh, I failed at that. And the result of failing should be so low consequence that when you fall on the ground, you're like, ow, that kind of hurt. But it didn't break anything. Didn't even bruise, right? And so that's the organic learning of falling. And maybe then is when you introduce falling or some more falling mechanics. But
I also think asking beginners to roll introduces more risk than the roll prevents.
Yeah, we actually had one of our very first classes, we had someone break their collarbone on a roll.
Wait, what?
Yeah.
Wait, really?
I've never heard this story.
They didn't tell us. They told us like 2 weeks afterwards. She had, it was on a spring floor too. And I think it was just a regular shoulder roll, but she hit the front part of her shoulder.
Yeah, and the bones just weren't strong.
And then, and after that class, it must not have been a big break because there was no like cry out or pain.
Yeah,
that was like visible. But yeah, 2 weeks later, she was like, "Oh yeah, she broke her collarbone. That's why she's leaving." So, but yeah.
But do you remember the technique? Were you guys going straight from standing, or was it on the ground?
I can't remember because we were teaching rolls that day. I can't remember which one she hurt it on.
Okay, but it probably wasn't a dive roll.
Like, yeah, I don't know. Long time ago.
Yeah,
I could see a dive roll really doing it though. But yeah, if that's the one thing about rolls, if you hit the front part of your shoulder, you've done more damage than you were trying to prevent.
Or the head.
Yeah.
For the head. And also everything I see is people coming out of them hitting the back of the head. So they'll take the first part of the landing on the forearm into the shoulder, and then they land on the back of the head.
Yeah.
So I'm always looking, again, I like to coach the neck strength thing. So when I make my adults do it, very diligent, or actually any of the students I work with, to keep the chin tucked so that there's no contact across the cerebral spine. You know, it's not, we talk a lot about rolling down the thoracic spine or flattening out and hitting the lumbar spine in rolling. But I think way more conversation needs to be had about the crown of the head in the landing and also the cerebral spine, because I think it's taking a lot of low impact hits over time. You're going to have like soccer kids.
Well, if you got floppy neck syndrome. Right?
Floppy neck, not good.
Yeah, it doesn't even need to hit the ground to really have damage.
It shouldn't touch the ground, right?
Did you guys have a bad roll injury? Anybody have one?
A bad roll injury?
Yeah.
Like from a
roll?
roll?
Or tried to do a roll or had the outcome before, and then you were like, ooh.
No.
When we were in about a few years into training, when we were in Vancouver, and I was working on the trees at, I think, Volunteer Park is what that is, where, you know, Ray Kelly.
Seattle.
Yeah, in Seattle, not Vancouver, Seattle. We I did a dive roll over one tree, and then there was a low running branch on the other, so I came up out of the roll into the tree, right, and just put me on the freaking head.
You did so much.
It was so bad, dude, because I can remember driving in the back of Tyson's truck.
Oh,
yeah. To the coffee joint. I had this horrible headache, and I was like, why do I have this headache? I just need coffee.
Oh, gosh.
Yeah.
Caffeine after head injury? No.
Yeah. So,
True breve.
Yeah, but I just need a little breve. Did fine on that trip.
Yeah.
It's a low altitude.
I think I remember you hitting your head, but I don't remember it.
Yeah.
It really affecting you.
I think it might have
been
your recorded.
Foam pit extravagant.
No, that's the straw that broke the camel's back, I think. So cool. So place for it, and the way, you know, where we teach it, you know, here, that I think is incredibly important, and also like, so there's like, I think that there's an incredibly complex system, which is falling and rolling and inversion and proprioception, that moves more towards how we divide our programs. Like the falling that you would be exposed to in our Terra program, which is focused more on the obstacles per se, you know, your goal would be, I don't want to get upside down, right? But if we look at our Orbit program, which is more focused on the individual and their expression on the environment, you want to be upside down.
Yep.
And for that, if you look at, you know, there's a viral b-boy rolls where people are in skate or taking those bails, and then they cut to a fall that's very similar in position in b-boy, but someone just dances out of it.
Oh, that's such a cool video.
I love those videos.
I have to link it to you.
Yeah, will you link that one? We'll show it. Also, if you look at certain athletes, I mean, if you look at like Pasha right now, who's doing his hype house bit.
Yeah, he's hype house
now. Where he is. Yeah, do what you gotta do, man. But he's like, you know, dive rolling out of windows off a roof and then doing another rotation into like an unmaintenanced pool in the backyard, right?
Yeah.
Like stuff like that. And he's always been doing those like sand dune dives since forever, right? Where he'll take like a roll and a double into like a steep graded sandy hill. Right?
Olaf just did one of those too. So Pasha had that roll off the roof.
Yes, he had the pencil roll off the little like facade. Olaf did that.
Which was so cool.
I loved it. Yeah, I thought that was very cool. Again, not low skill level people.
No. Yeah.
But those people also say, "Oh, I started doing rolling a lot earlier on." But you know, okay. So very specific technique. So we do teach them, we do volume, but I want to say that like for rolling too, I think style, to be honest, when we're talking about just a person rolling and we're not incorporating like a bar into it or like a height drop, I think style may be the strongest way to learn like rolling. Bails, you may be more on like our Terra program on like how to like, if you slip out and how to interact with the obstacle itself.
Yeah.
But if you're talking about is the individual, their proprioception and their ability to recover from being upside down, I think style is pretty strong.
Yep.
I think the orbit program, and I think that those kids, you know, they have to deal with bailing out of corks and full turns and have to, you know what I mean? So say a little bit about that. Like I think that goes underrated when we're, especially in the parkour community, when we talk about how valuable rolls is. We always think of a very tactical application of rolling and falling, but a lot of the people who just know what to do when they're upside down. The heel slip one, I've seen people do those on top of like the electrical boxes.
Yeah.
Right? They'll do the heel slip and then they'll fall over backwards. And I've seen some athletes sort of like catch and basically do a backflip out of the roll. I can't imagine that someone who is already experienced with backwards inversion wouldn't have a lot of luck with that, right? If they understood the context.
Yeah. I mean, so I don't know if it's necessarily useful in bailing on orbit or style necessarily. I think it is the style in some circumstances. In b-boy, certainly rolling on your back is a huge element of style. It's like almost all fundamental power moves, I feel like, incorporate that in some fashion. And I think it's really good for progressions on flips. When using a block to lift your center of gravity up where you would be rotating in the air and rolling at that height, I think that teaches you the height that you need, and then the landing, the amount of time you need to get from your flip rotation back to the ground. That's where I think rolling is really powerful. But yeah, considering that b-boy video that we watched, that makes it seem like rolling is really good for bails, but I think it came from the more focused on variation and styling. It's not. I don't know whoever was an intention for bailing from rolling where
it's like the
is effective for that
exposure to a wide variety of positions that you know, like breaking is so good at that, in that they find themselves in just the weirdest positions.
Yep.
And their goal is always to get in and out of that position just as fluidly, right?
To make it look good.
To make it look good because it's stylistic, and as a result of that, when they do bail on something, or like that video where, you know, somebody's doing something and then they bail, and you can find an exact clip of a b-boy or b-girl in that same position.
Yeah, entering in that
that's
position.
Then dancing.
Yep.
Out of that same thing. You're like, holy cow, they experience such a wide variety of movements. And absolutely, the Orbit program tries to expose you to as wide a variety of positions as possible so that you can develop your own style. And rolls are a huge component of that, because they're the fundamental way that we introduce inversion to a student. In fact, it's the fundamental way that babies introduce themselves to their back, right? They're like, whoop, and then they're on their back, and then they roll over, and then the next thing you know, they're like over in the cupboard. And you're like, holy cow, how'd you get there, right? Like, I remember all the babies that, like, growing up in our house, once they learned how to roll, they were just like, and they like find themselves over there, and they can't crawl yet. But I'm like, wow, that's incredible.
So rolling is a form of locomotion, not bailing.
It does help in bailing, but yeah, it really is more of a form of
it's like a snake.
I like that.
Yeah, rolling belongs under locomotion, and then falling belongs under.
I think like rolling's like, it's like a chimera skill that like it can fall under like style, it can fall under locomotion, and it can fall under falling, right? But I think what parkour tends to do is we consider rolling falling and falling rolling, and they're not, right? Rolling is just one very small subset of falling, because when I think of all the times I've fallen, and I've fallen a lot, a small percentage of those have been rolls. The majority of them have been like me being like, oh, and blocking off of things, or grabbing somebody and spinning us around, you know, goofy stuff. But it's very rarely a roll.
Right, which I think comes back to when we were talking in that earlier episode. I think one of the things I tried to bring up was your ability to sort of understand just general proprioception and what's around you, right? And so if that's more falling, like eventually you understand, then you use the roll as you fall. So it may have been too high level there. So let's talk a little bit about. So we run two programs that are the sort of the pillars of the education side of the gym, and those two programs are Orbit and Terra. That another bit of controversy was that we started splitting skills up, and then we called it Orbit and Terra. And why would we call it Orbit and Terra when some people might be like, oh, well, that's parkour and that's free running, or that's tricking and that's b-boy, or that's skill and speed. So that's, you know, why did we choose to use such like nebulous names and divide and teach that way. Because at the time that we were doing that, it really was a little bit controversial. Like people were like, you can't take this out of that and that out of this.
Yeah, normally you didn't get to learn inversion or flips until you were a higher level parkour athlete. So you had to train
like a level 2 skill.
Yep. You had to train all of the vaults and the wall runs and the tic tacs and whatever before you learned inversion. So I think part of that was just because we didn't quite have a handle on the very basic progressions for flipping and inverting. I think that was more gymnastics realms. So in that context, it made sense to start that way. If you don't know the basic progressions for learning how to invert and roll and flip, then you shouldn't do them right away. But I think that our focus right away was that we had that giant air trick, and let's figure out how we teach people from day one how to develop their style, right? And I think that worked really well for us because there were definitely some students who looked at parkour and the obstacle side and were just like, I really just want to flip off stuff, and we just made a section of the gym for them.
I think it's also that we've always watched, right? We've been in the parkour industry since it was in its infancy, and we've seen a lot of movement of parkour movement, right? We've seen a lot of athletes come up and we've seen their style, and there are a few notable athletes that we would watch, that we would look up to, and we were like, these guys have such an incredible movement style. Pasha was definitely one of them, right? Oleg's another one.
Yep.
Who, when you watch their movement, you were like, this is both entertaining and amazing, right? Where you traditionally watch parkour athlete who does these big jumps and you're like, that's incredible, but it's not entertaining, right? And we've always loved that style of movement. We've always loved that those people moved in what was a very unique and novel way. And so I think part of us, we were like, we want our students to develop that as well. We don't want them to follow our style. We want them to develop their own style. That is a huge missing component because the traditional parkour stuff can be so copycat. It can be very monkey see, monkey do, right? Wall run this, jump this, swing on this, right? And you can almost mimic somebody's exact style doing that unless you have some sort of artistic orbit aspect of it where you've nurtured your own creative style and then applied it and overlaid it back on top of, these traditional parkour moves. And so I think we wanted to separate those things too, because we felt like people weren't developing their own movement style from just doing obstacle challenges.
Yeah, and as we've talked more and more about the principles behind why we want to take this approach to teaching, and we haven't developed a zillion other programs, is that Orbit and Terra are absolutely parkour and any other discipline that's under the wing of what we teach in the gym. But they're uniquely our own because they're the programs, they're the vessels in which people learn these skills. So we're not trying to rebrand and then people would find some TV show down the road that would just be like, and now it's the Terra show, and
no, yeah, that's a very good point. We never wanted people to go out and train and be like, I'm doing Terra on this playground. It was just, you're right, the vessel in which we contained the area of the gym that taught that stuff. And then it was also the band challenges that we came up with because we wanted a system of ranking for both sides of the gym. And we had come up with the ranking for the Terra side already. We were using our old band system, and we needed a new one for the acrobatic side, so in the style side. So it was just natural that it had its own name. We couldn't call it acro and obstacle. It was just
originally they were called acro and obstacle.
Yeah,
and I think that talked a little bit to their nature when we were explaining them to parents or new people. Like, this is our acrobatic side, and this is our obstacle side, but they both have each other in them, which is another point we have to make, is that at some level, even if you are a densely pragmatic parkour athlete, you can benefit and you cannot escape in entirety the impulse to play and be creative. And that is amplified on the Orbit side. And the obstacles are amplified on the Terra side, but we talked about the difference between, Terra is I like to jump on stuff, Orbit is I like to jump off stuff, right? We jokingly
in like a layman's term.
Yeah, there's just several ways to sort of describe some of the subtle differences that doesn't capture everything, but that sort of hints at it. But they're both in each other. Very yin and yang in that way. They're like, you can't have one without the other.
I don't think you can. Yeah, I mean, you can try to stay away from doing the style side and doing acrobatics for as long as you can, but I don't think I've ever seen anyone who hasn't dipped their toes in it and found out that it is just a little bit of fun to express yourself and to be free of the challenges. I feel like that Terra focuses on
the obstacle, the environmental challenges.
Environmental
because the way Terra often scales up is the jumps get bigger, the risks get higher, or there's just more complex lower level stuff, but it's just gets harder and harder. The obstacles just keep getting harder.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
And on the orbit side, the movements that the human is doing,
you have to get more and more creative.
You have to get more and more creative. Yep. And introducing
the
artistry has to be higher. Absolutely.
Yeah, and I think for a lot of people, the hesitance and the reason we shifted away from calling it our acrobatic program is that a lot of people think acrobatic and they're like, well, I don't want to do front flips and back flips, right? And it's like, cool, you don't have to, and it's foolish of you to lump all of acrobatics in that realm, right? When orbit is more about style and movement that is less pragmatic, if we will, right? Like, I want to do my movement this way because I think it represents me and it's more fun for me to do it that way. That's orbit, right? That expression of creativity is orbit. And there's so much more to stylistic movement than flips, right?
Yeah.
I am very much like Ito about tricking. Right, I'm not quite as aggressive. Yes, I'm not quite as aggressive as Ito about tricking, but I can appreciate the athleticism and the incredible movement that they do. But I'm not a fan. You'll never see me training to do those things. I have my ABCs, and I'll work on maybe some doubles of theirs when I get bored. But for the most part, I'm like, cool. I feel like I've got a solid fundamental. ABC is aerial, butterfly kick, cork.
I forgot about that.
A twist, B twist, cork are kind of your ABCs, in case you guys are wondering what I was referencing there.
Yeah.
And those are like your fundamentals, like tricking of what you need to like level up. So I have those. I feel confident in those, and I love playing around in those realms. But you'll never see me going for like a triple cork because I don't feel that it stylistically represents me. But I have the most fun doing orbit stuff like dance and breaking because that feels like it's more authentic to me, right? And calling it an acrobatic program did it injustice to all of the things that we taught also in there that weren't just tricking.
People want a very specific definition for it, but the problem is you get more finite with orbit, you constrict creativity. It's like you're asking the artistic side to clearly define what art is.
Yeah.
And that's not going to work out. But there is confusion that we have to resolve, which is that it is not any one movement discipline that is more style focused. So there's always this: is it tricking? Is it free running? Is it breakdancing? Is it the style side? Parkour and these other things, or is it gymnastics? Like people say, oh, it's gymnastics. Oh, well, there's some martial arts. But anytime you look at art, you start to be reminded of familiar parts, and you try and identify with it. Like sometimes people will look at what we do and like, oh, it's like gymnastics, but on stuff. Like, ooh, that's a very like elementary description of what we do. There's a lot more going on there. But the bottom line is like, if it has to do with movement and it has to do with obstacles, it is more orbit. It is more parkour, right? The more intricate the individual is, even on one box, that could make it very orbitesque, right?
Yeah.
Even if it's on flat, it's still the person moving. So it definitely is very orbit, but I would definitely say that the intricacy of weaving obstacles in makes it more orbit and, by proxy parkour than anything else. That's why you can still go out and say, well, we have a lot of people who do orbit. Like the way I practice orbit is typically through a little bit of martial arts improv, which would basically be, tricking in many realms. It could fit in there. I like to flip off of stuff, which is definitely more free running-esque, right? Or the style side of parkour. And then where I put most of my energy right now is in the musicality part of b-boy. But it's not my goal as an orbit athlete to become an absolute b-boy or an absolute tricker or even to get onto art of motion or something. That's not my goal. My goal is to know what it's like and be able to play in that way, to capture it on video, to be in a space where I experience the environment, but I'm testing my, skills of creativity on those things, and then to watch what that looks like. Because I think there's a difference between being there, doing it, doing the flip, or doing the transition, moving in and out, following music even, and on and off in the environment, because that makes it more intimate the more you get involved with the environment. I think there's experiencing that. And then there's what everyone loves to watch, which is just Instagram feeds and YouTube videos where you look at that movement and you say, oh, that's so cool. I didn't know people could do that, but I want to do it, right? Yeah. To me, that's what the soul of Orbit is. And I think in the future, what I'd love us to see more of is people capturing that through videography or through moments of intimacy where you just have like a group together. We talk about Orbit definitely having the characteristics of a cypher culture. We're going to talk a little bit about cypher culture and why that belongs in Orbit and why we see a little less of it on the Terra side, still present because you can't take it out completely, but why cypher culture is a cool thing and why we see it in Orbit.
Yeah, so cypher culture is essentially, or a cypher in breaking is the culmination in the group of people who are listening to the same music and grooving the same music, but there's no structure or rules around how it's done. They're not battling, but there may be a little bit of like one up each other, but it's a playful energy where everybody's trying to pour their energy in to a singular person who's dancing at that time, right? And that person may be dancing in their own style. They may be going just footwork, or they may be doing only top rock, but they're listening to the music and they're feeling the energy and they're just moving how they want to move. And then the next person comes in and maybe they're all doing power moves to the music, right? But nobody's trying to one up each other. Nobody's trying to compete against each other. Everybody's here to just try and pour their energy in and have a good time. And Orbit is very much like that. And in fact, tricking has a very strong cypher culture already, culture, right? Mm-hmm. And that you'll see people go and they hit these really big like tricks, right? They break a PR, and then just the whole like crowd around the spring floor just rushes them in a very non-COVID friendly environment.
Very evangelical.
Touching each other. Very, yeah.
They're the Baptists of movement.
Yeah, right? And I think that's so cool because they're all there to try and like to feed energy to the person that's going. And so in Orbit has that same culture, and that's what we want to push and we want to encourage, is that everybody moves stylistically in their own way. Mm-hmm. Whether that's on obstacles like a free runner, whether that's on flat ground on the spring floor like a tricker, or whether that's with musicality, and what matters to them is less about the movement and more about moving to something external like the music, like a dancer, right? But all three of those matter, and we want people to be able to feed their energy into each other and be like, wow, Travis, you really killed the beat, even though all I do is tricking.
Right.
And Justin, the way the way you had that line where you did multiple complex flips on top of each other, connected fluidly on this obstacle, was incredible. He didn't do like triples, right? He did unique moves that maybe don't have a name, but he also didn't move to the music, but that's also Orbit. And I want to pour energy into Justin exploring that creative side of himself. That's cypher culture.
Yeah.
I want to throw out the video that we did for Orbit. We bottled a little bit of it, just a tiny fraction of how we train and the Orbit culture that we try to cultivate. We just made a video on it, so you guys should go check that out if you're like still don't understand what this cypher thing is about. I feel like if you still don't understand what cypher is, it's basically a dance circle where you're far more engaged. Everybody's engaged.
Everyone's engaged,
but it is one at a time. So, right?
You could have some transition, but generally it's the hype of the group, like a fire. It's meant to be like a fire, and you might even see stuff going further back from this, from like, tribal dance, and then also capoeira has essentially a cypher, which is called a hora, which is one at a time, or two people are going in together for a second, and then they come out. But like what Jesse's saying, it's to build that energy up, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that's what we're borrowing from. So I think people will see their discipline. Oh, we have that in trick. Oh, we have some of that in parkour. It's a little more golf clappy in most parkour environments, but
yes,
it can be.
Yeah. So check out the Orbit Vibes video if you're wondering what cypher culture looks like in Orbit, And Terra, do we want to move over to Terra now?
Yeah, I just want to say one more thing about to wrap up some of that orbit culture stuff, is that I think that there are little elements of each of the strengths, like the power of martial arts is shown in tricking, right? And but some of that cypher culture is there that comes from what we would give credit to mostly, which is hip hop and b-boy in there. I think that musicality belongs in deeper parts of training, and you may, like, to describe a perfect moment, you might have a real stylistic approach. You might also have somebody go through a series of movements and hit a triple off an obstacle on the bass drop, and that would be very orbit. And if everybody rushed in and lost their minds, that's still very orbit, because it's at the spirit of what we're trying to convey.
Well, and arguably that's higher level. That's transcendent.
That's transcendent.
What most people are doing right now. Right?
It's true. So that's where we'll lead the orbit. We'll talk more about it as we talk about the programs and show more of the Vibes videos. The Vibes series is what he's talking about.
Yeah, and a lot of it's visual. So as we produce
more
content specific to orbit, you'll watch that and you'll see that and you'll understand. But last thing I do want to say about the Orbit Vibes video is note, like, the number of smiles and goofiness that's in that video. Even though the moves are complex and very high level, like, when people fail, like, there's a clip of Justin bailing in, there's a couple of clips of, like, I think, like, Tony gets kicked in the face or something, right?
Yeah, that's definitely...
And it's laughs. Like, people are like, and they're laughing and joking even though they're failing at these high-level stuff. And that's cypher culture, is when people are playing together with the purpose of pushing each individual closer to their own creative goals.
The, like, group think can be negative, or you can have this mob mentality. It can go bad, but bringing people together in a positive way, you keep that energy is very difficult to match. And again, just before we as we transition into, or is it, are you good?
No.
Okay. As we transition into the Terra side, and what we're trying to create with that energy is, I got you. And what we're trying to create with that energy is the ability to see a little bit of that, or the creativity side, our orbit culture in Terra. Even if you go back to David Bell, that dude still was doing backflips off buildings.
Yes.
So it wasn't 100% practical. He's still going. Sebastian Foucan was still going to open gym sessions at gymnastics schools and messing around, trying stupid challenges, just like what we do. So here are these people who are the founders who are so serious, but also taking a little bit of either side. And
it's like, what's the point if you work really hard on these skills and then you never play with them?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
It's like having a really nice car and never driving it.
We're serious about
work really hard to buy this car or build this car for some people, and then you never take it out of the garage.
Right.
And it's like, you should at least take a lap around the block every now and then. You don't have to drive it across the country, but at least take a lap around the block and enjoy, the fruits of your labors.
Right. Be in the now with it. Right?
Yeah, which Terra can be a little too serious at times.
It has the risk of, yes.
It can be because it is so obstacle and challenge oriented, right? Easiest example is like a 10-foot wall run or an 11-foot wall run, right? Like, most people can visualize trying to run up a 11-foot wall and grab the top of it, right? It's a very easy challenge. And a lot of the times people will go for that and they're like, it's binary. Either you get the wall run or you don't. But Terra is the exploration of how you would get that wall run. Because for some people, it might be just running and hitting the wall and grabbing the top. For others, like Olaf, who loves buildering, like these funky buildering challenges that I look at and I'm like, no, thank you. I don't want to climb that small nub and break my nails, right? It might be like bear hugging this thing and then grabbing the top, right? And
he had his on his Instagram recently, that ascent up that with pylon with his. It was a toe pinch. We have to be very. That was a toe. Yeah.
Because this one here is.
Yeah, this is a heel, right? And then, he was quick to correct that I was wrong about calling it a heel hook. So Olaf, I'm listening and learning. Thank you, sir. But yeah, just amazing intricacy of the challenge. So let's talk about Terra, because that's at the heart of Terra.
Yep.
Is that intricacy of the challenge, the environment, the obstacle, the outside more.
Yeah. I think it's the beautiful thing about Terra is that you're always looking for a challenge, and that that exploration, that adventure to find new things to do challenges on is pretty fun finding a new spot where you can do more purist parkour and where you're finding gaps and things to swing on is one of the like very cool like rushes that I get. But that's very hard to find, and that's the hard part about I feel like Terracide is that you need the obstacles to be inherently challenging. Otherwise, you have to be more creative. And I feel like sometimes the creative part of Orbit can be a little exhausting because you're always trying to create. And sometimes Terra, like just walking into a place and being like, look, there's a jump. I can work on this for an hour. Like there's something like just super authentic about that and very relaxing.
Simplistic too.
And rewarding, because once you get it, it's like, I did it. I saw a challenge, I worked on it, and I conquered it. And there's something that just feels amazing when you conquer a challenge that you've been working on for a long time. And we see that when kids do band challenges on that last wall run, when they fail it 3 times in a row. And on the 4th one they get it, there is just such a sense of accomplishment.
Dude.
And that's the most beautiful part about Terra. And you'll see that when you train outside with people, and you'll see it in the gym, like during band challenges. But it's a very cool energy.
I have literally cried watching little girls get that, like, get a wall run.
That wall run.
And it's just, you're just like, you melt because it's so wholesome and heartwarming to see them achieve in that way and be so young and do that. To go from these little kids who, you know, as a parent, I feel like oftentimes, like, I wonder how, like, my daughter makes it downstairs and gets cereal on her own in the morning to a human who's facing their environment. Because the environment, it can be warm and welcoming, but usually its nature is
does not
cold,
care
just
about
trying
your
to kill you,
aspirations.
right? Does not care. It's a fight sometimes. It's a romance and a relationship. The outside world. It's definitely not considering you most of the time.
Nope.
And so to see the little kid do it is just such a human thing.
Yeah.
It's so cool. The humanity of it. And the environment on Terra leans more. Now I want to be clear. Both of these, we're talking about parkour here, but we're talking through the program lens of Terra. So on the Terra side, either it's the speed or the skill, the focus being on the outside, being on exploring the environment is really at the center of that, and then your ability to have a relationship with that environment is the next most important thing. And this is why we hear a lot of conflict about people being like, training in gyms and training out of gyms. But on the Orbit side, when you know what things are Orbit, you don't hear as much people being like, oh, well, you're only flipping in the gym, so you're not really doing parkour, right? That's not as strong, because deep down we all know that the relationship with the obstacle and the environment is really at the center of that focus and that style of parkour, that type of parkour that we're calling and teaching in our Terra program. The focus is less on the individual and their ability to manipulate themselves, free in that environment, like with flips and style, and more on the environment itself and the nature of that environment. And the more it becomes Terra, the more deeply you're involved with the intricacies of that environment and your ability to sort of wield that through finesse, through speed, through skills challenges, and overcome parts of it, but at the same time never completely separating yourself from it, because you'll fall and hurt yourself, right?
Yeah.
And that's why those skills end up feeling more pragmatic, because they're more in touch with the complexity of the obstacle increasing, meaning the wall getting higher, the gaps getting bigger, the layout of where you step becoming, the surfaces becoming harder, right? Harder and like difficult to understand and be in touch with. Where that's not as big of an emphasis in the Orbit culture, it's a huge emphasis on the Terra side of culture.
Yeah, in Terra you will need the obstacles to be unique and weird.
It's like a type of intelligence and IQ, an environmental IQ is required for Terra, right? And it becomes a little bit like mathematical to some degree.
A little bit.
Scientific in your approach, methodical, for sure. These were in the original, like when we came up with the words, we knew this years ago, because when we discussed it and then failed to proliferate those ideologies, it's in the name. Terra is called Terra because it was supposed to be about your relationship with Earth, with all things physical on the ground. Orbit was called Orbit because it was supposed to be about you and your ability to have some sort of like fantastic relationship with gravity,
Yep.
Right?
Yeah.
That's
just around the obstacles that you were on.
Or around the obstacles, right? Instead of, Terra, which is like, get on it. Terra is like definitely goat nature. Climb it. Get on it. It doesn't matter if it's sheer. Somehow my little hooves keep me on it, right? You know what I mean?
Yeah. I think a really good example would be like if you take a kid to like a mall and they have like a green space, and the green space has like rocks and like a fountain that's turned off, or whatever, and you let your kid go free, they almost always are like, that, I want to get on it. Right? And you're
like, no, not that thing. That's the highest thing.
And parents always joke about this. They're like, I turn around, and then when I flip back, my kid has climbed on top of something and is standing up there and isn't doing anything, looking like a nerd. It's just like eyes wide, walking around, right? And that right there, that essence of exploration and seeing an obstacle that's unique to you and being like, I want to touch it. I want to get on top of it. I want to explore it and see what challenges it offers me is the mindset of Terra.
It's very movement sensory, very high sensory movement. So talk about the exploration aspect, because that's the next biggest piece that just needs to be hammered into people's understanding of Terra. For the purpose of exploration.
I think it's where parkour maybe gets a little bit of a bad rap in that it's a bit. I think the term I used was roguish, right? And that like you see something and you're like, I think I'm not supposed to get on that, but it looks fun up there, so I'm gonna climb it. This often involves and manifests itself in teenage boys or teenage girls climbing on top of a roof of somebody's house or their house or trespassing and then being yelled at to get down, right? They are doing just harmless things because they're exploring, and something about an area that hasn't been either intended for people to get up to or is like locked off and shuttered away and is like, this cool balcony can only be reached by somebody who takes the elevator. Something about that stirs a human nature of like, I actually can get there without having to follow your path, the path that you set out with the stairs or an elevator. And so Terra has that exploration. We want to nurture that with a legal aspect, meaning we want to nurture we don't want you to trespass, but we do want our students in the Terra program to nurture their explorative phase. We want them to see something and be like, can I get there? And if I get there, what are my options? How can I get there? What are the challenges that this obstacle poses? Rather than what we lovingly call muggles may see something and be like, that's cool rock. And they continue on their hike, right? But somebody who has a Terra mindset will see a rock and they'll be like, I wonder what it looks like from the top of that rock. And they go and they climb the rock and they get on top of it and they're like, whoa, look at this cool view that maybe only a handful of people have seen because I was willing to go through the extra effort to explore that.
Yeah, whenever you use like a unique method to get somewhere that I feel like you couldn't have gotten there elsewhere, you gain this new perspective. You're standing on top of this rock that no one else has gotten to, or you got to in a unique way, and now you view where you're standing and the area that you came from differently.
Yeah.
Right.
Perspective.
You got from one spot of your gym or your urban environment to another, and how unique you got there. It just it twists your real view a bit. You can't look at the other things the same way.
You can't.
You're always trying to find something similar to that or a new way to do that same challenge, and that sticks with you forever. Like once you figure out that you can do that with almost everywhere, you're driving down the street and you're looking at everything that way.
Differently.
And it's so hard to get that out. Like once you see the world from that perspective, oh man, it's there forever.
It's that rogue or that rebel mindset too that parkour has a cultural association with, which is like, I'm supposed to stay in between the lines. Yeah. Right? I'm supposed to stay in my lane. I'm supposed to stay on the sidewalk. I'm supposed to take the elevator. Sometimes I can't even take the stairs because that's not allowed. Right? Sometimes it's deterred that you feel like you're taking some sort of like, facilities access when you take stairs, and they don't make it pleasant. There are no encouraging signs like, there's only 12 more stories, go. Right? It's just drab and not maintenance. Its culture does not want you taking the stairs, right? They want you to take the elevator because that's fast and that's efficient. So for comfort, you take the elevator. For fitness, you take the stairs. For parkour or for Terra, you take the terrace.
Yes.
You take the facade,
right?
The external facade of the building.
Come on from the outside, or enter from top. One time recently, we had a coffee shop that we like in town, Bindle Coffee, and they should sponsor us. We name drop enough, and the new Jams buy them. I think we should be getting free coffee from both Bindle.
I think we can pit them against each other.
Right, like they had someone break into their coffee shop and steal the cash, which was.
They didn't steal the beans?
Right. I'm like, you idiots. The coffee's worth more than what's in the cash box. Right? So, I probably shouldn't advertise that for anyone who's been breaking into coffee shops. It's like, wait, what? Yeah. Black market coffee is a thing. So, they have like, it's an old repurposed like kind of farmhouse. And so the person had broken the glass in the front door and then come in, taken the cash box, and then left. And then I went in, and jokingly they were like, "Oh yeah, we watched the video, and there were a bunch of parkour guys in here." I'm like, "I know you're lying, because we wouldn't have come in the front door. We would have come from the window on the roof." And
also,
they just died laughing.
Your building's on the floor, so
we wouldn't
have been there at all.
Nope.
It doesn't interest us.
Kind of not. I mean, it's a little bit. They would have had a Mission Impossible situation to get that coffee from their top window.
They would have never known we were there.
They would have never known. They'd be like, guys, the coffee's gone, but the cash is here. It must have been an employee.
That's how they would have known. That's how they would have known. They'd have been like, it's those freaking Breve bros.
They were like, wait, check if the half and half is gone. There's 2 topos missing and all the half and half. Okay, I know exactly who did. Half the vanilla syrup is gone too.
Yeah.
Wait, they're still in the back eating the pastry.
Yeah, no, Terra has that like that unique exploration.
Yeah.
It's exploration in a unique way too, right? Like we had talked about the example of like hiking, and hiking can be, if you just follow the trail, can be very explorative, right? You can hike and you can visit at the end of this hike a cool view that very few people have seen because the hike itself is difficult. But that isn't necessarily the Terra mindset, because it's a trail that's already been paved for you. It doesn't fit that roguish nature, right? Now, if you get to the end of the trail and somebody's like, I want to go off, the feeling of I want to go off this trail to see a different perspective is that Terra mindset, is that exploration, that explorative energy that fuels that program, is that we want to introduce both the skills that enable you to safely do that and quickly do that and explore, but we also want you to nurture that feeling. Again, we're not encouraging people to trespass. We're also not encouraging people to like walk over native grass restoration areas and stuff like that. Right. Don't go off the trail if you're hiking sometimes, because it can be damaging. That being said,
don't stick the precision on the rock that's been bouncing for 10 million years and you're the guy who knocks it over, or the pyramids and you're breaking. Well, maybe if you can, I think probably parts of the pyramids you could.
Yeah, that's one important thing too to notice about, or to mention about parkour, is that we have an inherent respect for the obstacle that we want to explore, and damaging it is the exact opposite of what we want to do.
We want to be able to come back to it.
You know,
if you break it, you can't come back.
We understand that looking at something, a rock formation or a mountain or something has an experience of its own, but we can also respect it by being on it and without damaging it. But exploring it with climbing and jumping is a level, or is a form of respect for us. I feel like like we have no desire to destroy the things that we're jumping on, because then we can't jump on it.
And if you're younger, and you're listening to this, that's something you do need to foster. I don't think that's inherent. I think I see a lot of sort of goofy teen behavior, just jumping on stuff. Well, and you might not be you might be aware. Like the first time I realized a lot of handrails weren't strong enough to be jumped on was because one broke, right?
Yes, yeah.
And you're like, what? And you're kind of like, well, they should have fixed this anyway, because this is a safety hazard. If I can't stand on it, then if someone who's handicapped falls on it, grabs it, gets hurt worse, I can handle it. But at the same time, that's still property, and maybe that person was like, budget's tight, I don't have money to fix the handrail, and then some kids are over here, leaving Taco Bell on my handrail after they broke it. Don't.
Yeah.
You're still teenagers, so there's that too.
Yeah. In fact, I think I want to say it was Tyson, but it could have been somebody else from the like Sturdy Mate group who, this was a while ago, like was out training and they broke a hand railing from the anchor point in the concrete had snapped. And they came back a week later and actually just repaired the hand railing in like a actually sturdy way. So they filled the concrete, put in new wedge anchors in there, and actually put like the proper depth wedge anchors in there and fixed the hand railing so that it was sturdy enough for people to jump on or use, right? And while that's obviously an extreme example, because I think maybe the city might still consider that vandalism.
That's following through on the brand promise for Sturdy Mate right there.
Yeah, right. I think that's part of the why too, is that Sturdy Mate was always about like, things should be made for everybody to play on them, regardless of their original intention. If it's not sturdy enough to play on, then it wasn't sturdy enough to begin with.
Originally, when I was first getting into parkour and I worked in an office environment, I had this idea of the right to move, and it being sort of like a tongue-in-cheek amendment to the Constitution that would essentially be like the freedom of speech extended to movement. And one of my arguments was that if we're going to accommodate folks as far as access, you see a lot of the access accommodations that have been changed in the U.S. for people who...
The ADA stuff.
Yeah, the ADA stuff, where it's like we could have something on the other side of it that would be for kids and youthful-minded adults, which would be like these spaces are also could accommodate a not for-purpose use, right? And this is a very like first world problem. But I'm acknowledging that. But I sort of was like, to some degree, freedom of speech is I'm not going to censor myself and without, obviously with consideration for harm to others. But is freedom of movement an extension of that? And when you take someone into an office environment and you're saying, hey, here's a 9 to 5 at a tech company, we inherently know that sitting at a desk for 8 hours a day is bad for your life. It's going to make you sick, and it may make you sicker than some other decisions that you make. The requirement to provide some free movement space or the option for standing desks, or in the office I worked at, we even went so far as to put pull-up bars on first and second floor. So just like when you go to the freaking, you guys know, if you ever have, well, we're building a building, so I'll tell you this, you have to have drinking fountains or water distribution placed in certain levels for where occupancy is. My analogous attack on that was you need a pull-up bar for both floors, because you should be able to access pull-up bars on the first and second floor. The owner was my friend, and they were really cool. But Encompass Technologies is a bigger tech company, a couple hundred employees. So this is a big deal. It's a big building doing this, and then the option for everyone to do standing desks. Because back then, standing desks weren't the hotness. Yeah. I had an empty printer cartridge box and an IKEA coffee table that was $14.
The side tables?
Yep. Yeah. And I actually had a precision rail underneath me so I would balance and stretch my calves.
The old ones.
The
threaded pipe ones.
The threaded pipe ones, yeah. And I would use those. And I just did it in conjunction with another buddy. And then little by little, we transitioned to that office being 40% standing desk. At its peak, it was 40% standing desk. In the beginning, people were just making fun of us and saying, well, we have customers coming over, you can't have like this, IKEA table with a cloth draped over it as like your desk. And I was like,
yeah, I mean, you come in, every time I would go in, I'd just see cables and computers. It wasn't like, I was like,
right.
Oh, wow, what a cool place. The new building was definitely cool, but it's still like, this is a cool building with computers and cables.
Right. And so I think that need for humans to interact with their environment in a deep way. We always look at these dystopian futuristic movies where everyone is in a super sterile environment and they all take their serotonin uptake inhibitors and their anxiety meds, and it keeps them acting right, and we act like this is a future we don't desire. So part of that is building a future where humans are allowed to be human in the space that they occupy. It's bad enough you can't be born into existence and not have to work your entire life just to have a place to live. You should also still be able to have some sort of relationship with your environment.
Yeah.
And that's the way I feel like places like that don't accommodate in that way or don't have as much nature, or the tragedy of sort of like the plains in the Midwest, where it's like I go there and I don't feel invited to move on anything. And I think that's a huge cultural issue that's going to affect the health of the people in the Midwest and other more rural environments, where it's like you used to have a forest to explore. Your great-grandfather was Huck Finning it out there in the creeks and climbing trees and wondering what fantastical beasts live beyond, the glen. Right? So you've got that, Well, no, that is, people know that's all soybean right now.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, fly over it. It's all soybean and corn, and then all the raccoons are confined to one place where they just crap on everything right next to the creek. So you've got wildlife condensed into a little bit of creek space, and at best you're back there like avoiding raccoon poop. That's what the Midwest was. A lot of it was like. You get an open area, you don't have as much of that. But I'm saying like the suburban or transitional environments, you aren't invited to explore the space that way. And people would take pictures of you. Well, what does that guy do? You'd be more likely to get hit by a hunter. Like Dick Cheney might shoot you with a shotgun before you felt safe hopping around on some fallen trees in the Midwest or the South, right? Chased by a wild boar or something like that.
Yeah. So yeah, that's the Terra mindset, is that we want your environment to invite you to play, and we want you to have the mindset that's willing to accept and has the tools capable of engaging in that activity, of that romance with your environment.
Yeah. Where does just to, in order to sort of wrap this up, because my last detour segued from the spirit of Terra a bit much into policy. Where does competition and skill and those domains fall in relationship to Terra? Why would we not just call it this is parkour speed, and this is parkour skill per se, and this is parkour play per se?
I think because one, I personally, and I think this goes for us, don't quite have the hubris to try and say what parkour competition looks like forever, right? And I don't want to box. We've always been anti-box, right? Except box to climb on. We want to be on top of the box, not in the box. And so I feel like when we label things based on what their competitive natures could be or are, but not to a great degree, we end up boxing the direction that students go in, right? And I think that's a huge problem that both martial arts can have, gymnastics can have. Yeah, gymnastics, the roadmap is not to play. The roadmap is to compete. Ideally in the
I don't
Olympic
even know
level.
What's an environment of gymnastics that's not about competition,
right? The entire thing, even the rec program is designed to be a sieve for the competitive athletes to fall through and get into the competitive program
and fund. Let's be honest, fund the gym,
fund the competitive. Yeah, exactly, right. And then martial arts has not quite as bad, but a very similar in that people come in and they're like, I'm here to fight and get better at fighting. I want to be combative, right? So they think the end goal is always to just beat each other up.
And it's often all about the belts.
Yeah, or the ranking. And so
we don't want it to be that
way. And martial arts can be so much more about that. In fact, every sensei and martial arts master will be like, no, like, you have internal conflict, Travis. Before you can master the external, you have to master the internal, right? There's there's all sorts of philosophy in martial arts that gets overlooked because people come in initially with the concept of, I want to fight people. And I'm scared of doing that with parkour. I love competition. I want to nurture that, and I want athletes who want that to have that opportunity. But I worry that if we begin to label programs like that, kids who don't want to compete feel that they have to. And now we've committed the same crime that we were subject to, or right. I was subject to in a sport, and that I like playing a sport. I don't like competing in a sport, right? I just want, like, tennis. I enjoy playing tennis, going out with friends and just like playing a couple of games of tennis in the essence of like, it's fun and it's playful. But if I had to go to a tennis competition, I'd be like, no, I'm out. This isn't fun for me. And I worry that if we label the programs based on their competitive tracks, we lose both the spirit of parkour and we lose the kids who originally we built the programs for, that parkour connected with the deepest at its heart, which was people who are like, I want me to be able to move in my way, in my space.
But we still give room for competition.
Absolutely. But that's the thing is competitive athletes can always compete, right? And they will always find a competitive track. And we want to provide that end goal for them. But we can do it without being disingenuous to those who don't want to be competitive. And I think that's right. They're going to be okay in a class that's like playful and fun, and certainly some of them are like, I want to be more serious, and we have that option for them as well.
But it's up to them as to whether they want to do it alone.
Well, and they're never offended by being in a group of people who are having fun. A competitive athlete, if they have an ego issue. But nobody is ever like in a group of people who are having fun, like, oh, these guys are having too much fun. They need to be conditioning, right? Like, if that's your coach, he's a bad coach. If that's your athlete, he's an egotistical athlete. But the reverse will happen, where if you're in a group of people who are like, no, grit fitness, another rep, one more rep, one more rep, right? You will get somebody who's in there who's like, this isn't fun for me and I don't want to do this. And as a result of that, they don't say, I don't like this atmosphere. They say, I don't like this sport.
Yeah.
And then by extension of that, they say, I don't like fitness. As an extension of that, I don't care about movement and health. And now they find video games, which are so attractive. And they're like, that makes me happy. I don't need fitness. I tried fitness once. It was a bunch of people yelling, one more rep.
I want to go to that gym. Sounds encouraging. No,
in the right place, right? But so
right. No, I get what you're saying.
We have to.
It's too exclusive.
It's too exclusive.
We don't want to be exclusive. We're very. My wife says that I'm hypocritical. I just think I'm complex.
Sometimes a hypocrite is just somebody who's in the process of changing.
It's true. I'm forever in the process of changing. And so, like, it's like that. I say that too, but there are times where I want to compete a little bit and be more serious. So we have that caveat. That's the beauty, is that you say that, but you competed and you are competitive in your nature.
Yeah.
And that's okay to have both, but we don't just want to be like, this is the way it has to be. That's the type of dogma we're trying to avoid.
And I want to be able to flip that switch
when you want to,
right? I want there to be an option for me to compete when I'm ready to, but I want to spend the majority of my time having fun. And maybe the reverse is true, in which case those athletes need a track too, where they're like, I want to spend my time focused, dialed in, and then I want to play every now and then. That's cool too, and we have that track and that option for you. But I think the majority of people fall in the I want to have fun. And
figuring out what's fun for you.
Yeah.
It's very important. You get that, you've learned something super early on. And I think that there is another element to Tara as we wrap up. The self-defense aspect, you brought up martial arts. But if I was going to learn parkour for self-defense, I would start through the Tara program if you're coming through us, right?
Yeah.
I would look for those pragmatic types of parkour. And I just think that when we talk about what's really promised by martial arts schools, I will harp on them in many ways by saying that, yes, the skill of if you find yourself in a grappling scenario or a complete system of martial arts for battle or whatever in ancient China or modern practical times as the gladiator of, Krav Maga or whatnot, like there is context for that, and that has to always be looked at. When you're dealing with kids, like I think that parkour is the best thing. Like if someone's just like, hey, you need to teach your daughter who's 9, like, these top skills. What are you going to keep her safe? What are you going to teach her? I'm like,
how to run.
Run, like the ability to get away.
Anybody.
You're not going to fight anybody. If you do get in a scrap, when it's a life-threatening situation, it's going to be things like scratch the eyes and pull at the mouth and bite, like kick, and then and be hard to hold on to, right?
She does all
like that. Those skills, I think she's got down, right? And then also to really be aware of the true way to protect yourself and not get all like bug out bag, obsessed with your tactical self-defense, is avoidance.
Yep.
But it's not as romantic.
No.
Right? It's not
until
as cool.
now.
Until now. Avoidance is now cool. The ability to like get out and avoid violence as your highest priority, I think, is very important and you learn that a lot. You can learn that a lot from parkour if you read about physical space. Especially if you're a teenager and you have to get out of a scenario quickly, or a kid.
You stand attack and you run.
Yep.
Pokemon has
it. Kick him with the sand. Go on.
Stats and evasion, man. Everybody's been dumping stats in constitution and strength. Dump into that dexterity.
Dump into the dexterity and treachery. Yeah. So I think that I would like to do a whole episode for a future. We'll put a pin in that in parkour for self-defense. I think that's a good one.
Yeah. But yeah, so Orbit and Tara
now
fused together like Goku and Vegeta to become parkour.
Or the Outrunner.
And the Outrunner.
The Outrunner.
And that's our view on it. We're never like saying that people go out and we want them to do Terra outside or we want them to do Orbit outside. That is just our programmatic names for how we train them to go out and be awesome outrun athletes.
Right, and you don't, I can't imagine a school where it's like someone is just like, oh, I'm doing Terra. Like, they don't talk that way anyway. They say, oh, I do parkour. And then they say, oh, what do you have the bands that they have? Oh, yeah, I'm in Terra and I do that. That's how they talk. So I think that's being represented correctly. And I don't expect people, it'd be cool to be like, oh, there are those outrunners out there looking at, like, the culture and the crew that we are. But I'm not like, I'm outrunning.
Yes.
Right? Like, come on.
We want to,
come on.
Yeah, it's too obvious.
If you think that's what we're doing.
We don't want to be the verb.
We're trickier.
The verb is parkour.
Yeah.
We're doing parkour. I guess, obviously, your parkouring would be the verb. But you get my point. We don't want to be orbiting. Mm-hmm. Orbit's just how we practice and develop our parkour skill.
Yep. Yeah. Yep. It's how we understand it and keep it more parkour, to be honest, without having to cut it into a million pieces in a movement buffet. Mm-hmm. So, cool.
Thanks for tuning in. As always, we are also on YouTube. So if you're listening to us on Spotify or Apple or wherever you find your podcasts, there's a bunch. We're also on YouTube, so you can watch us, see our pretty faces. If you're watching us on YouTube, hi, wave to the people. You can also catch us on mobile if you don't have like YouTube Premium or whatever it is, so you can't close the app. You can find us on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. That way you can listen to us and do other stuff.
Yep, search for us. Nice. So follow on Spotify, I believe it is.
Yeah.
Yep, and then you subscribe on Apple. And for Apple, if you just have an iPhone, you guys just swipe down in that little search field, type in podcasts. If we're the first one you guys subscribe to, that'd be awesome. Thanks.
Thanks for tuning in to the Outrun Show. We will catch you next time.
Pew, 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 pew.